Hello, everybody. Welcome. This is another of our fortnightly Monday evening meetings organised by Talking About Socialism from a Marxist point of view. A fortnight ago, we had a session on Your Party, and it's got almost 2,000 or 1,800 views on YouTube. So clearly there's a lot of interest in this subject. And tonight, in a minute, I'm going to introduce two speakers from Talking About Socialism who are going to address the question, how can we make your party democratic and socialist? I think everybody knows that over 700,000 people have signed up to your party, this new party. So there's going to be a lot of discussion, a lot of different views, a lot of disagreement. And from the point of view of Talking About Socialism, we want to raise our ideas about democracy and socialism, and that includes what socialism is. I'm going to be chairing tonight's meeting. My name is Nick Rack. I'm one of the organisers of Talking About Socialism. The meeting itself is recorded and it's going to be put up on YouTube tomorrow. So if you come into the discussion, bear that in mind. And if you don't want to be seen, please turn your video camera off. But a lot of people are going to watch the videos, so come into the discussion if you can. We like differences, we like disagreement, and everybody should get a chance. Without any more from me, we're going to have two speakers. Barry Biddulph is going to go first, and then Stephen Owen will go second to introduce the discussion. They'll each speak for about 15 minutes, but we'll then open it up to the floor and hopefully it will generate a lot of discussion. So Barry, over to you, please.
I want to start with Corbyn's description of your party. This is what Corbyn said about your party. Your party is democratic and inclusive, and it's a new way of doing politics. Now, that is completely untrue. The origin of your party was in a small group of people behind closed doors. And that's the old Labour politics of a handful of people at the top making decisions about the structure and nature of the new party. Now, initially, we didn't know who was involved. There was no transparency whatsoever. And then things began to emerge. These people were squabbling and leaking information to the bourgeois press. And then we began to get some details of who was involved. And we could probably guess anyway. We know a lot of the people who were in around Corbyn when he was leader of the Labour Party. So people like James Snyder and Carrie Murphy, and there's also other people involved as well. The names are becoming known as the process unfolds, but it's not a democratic and open process. And they're acting like first-class members, and the rest of us have yet to get membership status. It's quite clear, or is becoming clear, that they don't want members before the conference. My guess is the conference is going to be, they want to control the conference, so the conference is going to be about MPs and their supporters, independent MPs and their supporters, and the circles around Jeremy Corbyn and their supporters. Whether we get a place at the conference is debatable. We might be on our keyboards voting on options that these people give to us. So it doesn't bode well for the democratic structure of the party. We might have a role as members after the conference as door knockers for an electoral alliance, but we'll have to see. But in his interview with Owen Jones, Corbyn was quite clear that his favoured option, the option that he's going to advocate, which obviously will be of great influence, is a very broad electoral federation or umbrella. And it's going to be modelled on his work with independent MPs in Parliament. Now, those independent MPs are, of course, independent of socialism. But he's got this working arrangement with them whereby they agree on Palestine and then they agree to disagree on the rest. So some of those MPs have quite conservative positions on some issues. And so he agrees to forget about that. So that model for a national electoral umbrella doesn't sound very solid to me. It lacks ideological coherence. It doesn't even reach the level of old Labour. So it's very common denominator politics. So that's it. That's how he envisages the party, with a almost exclusive, certainly a very heavy emphasis on a very, very broad electoral machine. Now, in the interview with Novara, Zarah Sultana took a slightly different tack. She wanted to call the party the Left Party. So it seems she wants the party to be sort of left-wing, but again, she left the definition, her definition of what left-wing means, unclear. And when she came to talking about what was happening at the base, she didn't seem to be in favor of branches, the basic democratic building block of a party where people formulate policy, formulate strategy and program, and elect delegates to a conference. She didn't seem to mention any of that. And she made her comments about old-fashioned way of doing things, men in rooms. So I think that was a dismissal of the kind of branch structure I think we're looking to for a democratic party. Now, when she was talking about community, she was talking about community empowerment. This was instead of branches of a party. She was talking about community empowerment. And what she said seemed similar to James Snyder's concept that neoliberalism has atomized the working class, and therefore what we need to do is to bring people together, have associational events, beer and skittles. Nothing wrong with beer and skittles, but he doesn't see that. He doesn't really focus on politics. It's more about bringing people together, and he believes that this was the key to Corbyn winning his election as an independent in Islington, bringing the community together. Now, he has been criticised by Andrew Murray, who is someone who's part of the circles around Corbyn. Andrew Murray makes the point that this idea from James Snyder is what James does is what Murray says is de-aggregating the working class. A horrible expression, but for example, James Snyder talks about targeting for support the asset poor workers, whatever they are, and downward moving graduates. And he's definitely trying to isolate segments of the population. So it's not a class-based approach. Now, there are those comrades who also want to talk about the collective weight of trade unions, to bring the collective weight of trade unions into the party, so that trade unions will have a special place in the party, extra votes, block votes. Now, I think we want one member, one vote, not any group having a special status. And these comrades seem to want to rerun the birth of the Labour Party, although they don't seem to understand the birth of the Labour Party. Certainly, the Labour Party was initiated by Keir Hardie, who his Labour alliance was half party, half trade union, and it was an alternative to socialism. Many of his comrades and other people at the time wanted a socialist party, but this was his alternative, and it had a special place for trade unions. But that was changed in the First World War in 1918 by Henderson, who had a new structure for the Labour Party, which was highly centralised, and it became a national interest parliamentary party where power was located in the PLP and the Labour Party leadership. So in any case, history doesn't repeat itself except as farce, and it does show a lack of imagination to expect a rerun of the Labour Party. And do we really want another even more decades of Labour governments and everything they represented? Of course not. So I don't think they should have a special place in the party. One member, one vote. The other problem, I think, with Corbyn's outlook or perspective is this heavy focus on Parliament. It comes at a time when there's been decades-long crisis of representation for working people, where the establishment parties haven't been representing people. And this has been expressed in the rise of the Reform Party. They fill this vacuum. And in crisis, where you get crisis, and since 2008, there's certainly been something of a crisis in British capitalism and the weakening of British capitalism. In a crisis, the capitalist class tend to circumvent, bypass Parliament, look for figures like Nigel Farage, look for more authoritarian solutions to their problems. So we've got a threat from the far right, and the fascists are also mobilizing. And this means that Parliament is less prominent than it otherwise would be. I think Corbyn, although he's not in the Labour Party anymore, we've got to remember that he's still, he didn't leave of his own volition. He was pushed out of the Labour Party, forced out. And he was reluctant, even when he was forced out, to create a new party. And it's only Zarah who forced his hand by saying she was co-leader. So he's also a reluctant leader as well. Now, what's his program? What's his strategy? Well, he's trying to make the welfare state mainstream again. In other words, he's got nostalgia for the welfare state. Now, the welfare state was in a completely different historical and political context than today. It was in the days of capitalist boom. It was in the days of the post-war settlement. It was in the days when British capitalism, although in decline, was still strong and could afford to give concessions on the welfare state. So I don't think that's a realistic proposition. Again, it's another case of trying to repeat history when that's not possible. Now, the other point is, so he's got a mild reformist program. He talks a lot about peace and justice, but the point is war and injustice is integral to capitalism. And that would mean if you wanted peace and justice, you need the abolition of capitalism, which certainly Corbyn doesn't stand for. And given the weakness of British capitalism and its reliance on the financial sector, what happens if Corbyn's electoral alliance is successful and he tries to implement these mild reformist program? What happens when capital takes flight or capital disinvestment or other reactions to his modest proposals? He won't be prepared for it, and then we'll get a collapse like Syriza or other types of broad electoral political parties. I'm going to leave it there because I've been told to wind up.
Barry, thank you very much indeed. A lot of points there. I think you've provoked a lot of discussion, and I'm going to ask Stephen to come in, and then we'll open it for the discussion to start. Stephen.
Thanks, Nick, and thanks, Barry. So I think where Barry is kind of, I would say, emphasised really the democratic questions that are currently being thrown up by this new for your party name undetermined. I'm going to major on really the socialist aspect, what we think the politics of this new party should be. So to begin with, I think I'm going to speak about the small amount of experience I've had with the local group in Stockport, which had its second meeting on Saturday. And I'm not going to give a full report of that meeting. But I think one point I'll make, and I know others had made immediately afterwards, was it was very noticeable for how much the word socialism was used by a whole variety of people from all sorts of different perspectives within that meeting. So while, I think as it is to be expected, there was quite a broad consensus on the necessity of democracy within the party, perhaps not expressed in varying ways. It was very noticeable at just how many people spoke about the need for a socialist party and socialism. Now, of course, there are many types of socialism. It means different things to different people. But the fact there is little shame or concern about that word anymore does reflect the increasing plausibility of a radical break with the existing order to a growing, I would say not insignificant section at all of the population. So in that sense, as communists, there is a major opportunity here to argue for socialist and communist politics. And while I would argue that, of course, right now, democratic issues should take on greater emphasis currently, so that, I think, as Barry expressed, so that the possibility of a party where we can't really argue freely and openly for what party we want, so that is not something that occurs. But I would argue at the same time that the demand for a socialist or communist program goes hand in hand with this idea. So at the end of the day, socialism, to my mind anyway, it means a society in which the working class, as a class, democratically holds political, economic, and social power. The result, a society which is controlled by the vast majority, it clearly goes in hand with the demands for democracy, which, I would say are not just about giving us the ability to organise and argue for our politics, but are for the party to have the same foundations as the future society we look to fight for. So how do we put this politics forward? So I think we have to begin with that by saying that I think a fundamentally different society is being cried out for in Britain today. Not wholly from the left. I would argue that there's a significant proportion of the reform vote, for instance, that is a different a very reactionary expression of mass discontent. But there is also a huge left component to this, a huge component of people who are moving to the left of the Labour Party and all of the other major parties beside that. So there are lots of inroads for socialist and communist ideas within the likely hundreds of thousands in the new party, and of course those who will not yet be members. So I would say that the first step in doing this, and it was something that is a democratic demand, which is fighting for a party programme that applies to every facet of the organisation's activity and can be amended by the membership as frequently as is practically possible. This should differ from the typical manifestos of political parties, which are written by a small staff of party officials and wheeled out just before an election, usually, on a very opportunistic basis. It's just, what issues can win over a decent section of the population and aren't completely and utterly unacceptable to our members. So instead of this, and democratically agreed motions on issues outside the programme, should be a guide to action, within this party on all matters. So whether intervening in a trade union or a social movement, how parliamentary representatives should vote, when we talk about the question of the independent MPs and of Jeremy Corbyn and Zarah Sultana, of course, for that matter. And of course, what we would stand for in an election. So when we consider the form of, going on to what these demands fundamentally are, I would say, and how we can speak to those who are interested in your party. So when we consider democratic demands, so the form of state that is, initially, or a form of governance, I suppose, that is required for the working class to rule as a class, the arguments for a vastly more democratic society obviously will have a lot of appeal in a context where the police is cracking down on peaceful protest against the Gaza genocide, and where the vast majority of the population have watched our political class consistently go against their will for years, in a way that, and be very, very difficult to hold to any sort of account. And again, on the point regarding Gaza, the genocide and our state's response to it, both at home and abroad, has the potential to expose the nature of our state, and its armed bodies of men in the police and military. So in that sense, I think arguing for a society where governmental power is properly accountable through the right of recall, where the police and military are drawn from the population, are democratically accountable as citizens' militias, where democracy is not just a case of ticking a box once every few years, and where our political representatives are not elevated above the rest of society with a huge range of privileges, vast salaries, etc. I don't think this is particularly difficult to argue for in the context we're in currently. And then, fundamentally on the question of the working class taking up the ownership of the means of production. So I'm going to class them as economic demands, I guess I would say. In this case, the likely left social democratic programme, which is probably what would be agreed if there is in the founding conference, there is a programme that is proposed. Again, it will fail to raise the issue of workers actually controlling the industries they call to be nationalised. So rather than having a nationalised industry, I think, as Barry was talking about the post-war period, rather than having an industry with the exact same undemocratic corporate structure and many of the same people who were in the pre-nationalised industry coming over from capitalist companies, we want workers, both those who work in the industry and those who use these key utilities, to control the industry through elected representatives. And additionally, if we look at the campaign of Zoran Mamdani, for instance, for New York mayor, very much a left social democratic candidate, unsurprisingly, he won the Democratic primary with policies such as the creation of publicly owned supermarkets as part of a generally left social democratic program. On that basis, I highly doubt the public in America is substantially different from those in this country, and certainly not the membership of your party. So why don't we argue for the public ownership of the existing supermarket chains in this country under democratic control? I think from winning arguments like this on isolated issues, essentially, it is then possible to argue for the general principle that production should not be organised around the drive for greater profits in the hands of the capitalist class, and instead organised and planned collectively around the needs of the society as a whole. And finally, I think, the fundamental question of reform and revolution. So, the idea that these policies will require a break with capitalism as a whole is something which can easily be evidenced by the experience of the Corbyn years, though unquestionably that is not the view of everyone who experienced that. So alongside, relentless media campaign, which I'm sure we're all aware of, we saw the very open intervention of other capitalist powers, so be it the United States, from what I recall, Israel and others, in denouncing a potential Corbyn government before there was even any huge likelihood of it coming into existence. And things like the intervention of a British military general to say that Corbyn was unfit for high office. Some very significant examples of intervention of very key kind of actors in both domestic and kind of international politics and representatives of the ruling class. So the idea that all of this was stopped, let alone not worsened in the event of a victory for the Labour Party in 2017 or 2019, to me seems like a completely bizarre thing to think. It would have got worse, and we would have seen a repeat of probably likely of something like either he would have capitulated, I think, or there would have been something similar to the coup in Chile in 1973. And it has to be said, this was for a left social democratic programme, which was, in reality, much more limited in its scope than the proposals of the Labour left in the 70s and 80s, let alone of a genuinely communist political programme. So I think, the next point I'll make, I think really the final point that I'll make, is it's not to say, however, that there aren't serious uphill challenges for communists within this new party. So I think the first I would identify is in stressing the need for internationalism and genuine internationalism with a weight behind it, organisationally speaking. So we live in a country where a huge majority of the population currently argues for greater immigration controls, views immigration as kind of a hugely negative thing, something which I would argue, that view inherently impedes the ability for the working class to organise and struggle collectively across borders. Similarly, we will have to fight against the pressure for the party to take office as soon as possible on any basis, which in the context of many severe crises of British capitalism that are going on at once, it is an understandable impulse for most of those who will join this party. There are, I'm sure, other examples I could mention. And I think, we have to recognise that the response, I'd argue, the communist response on both these questions will likely not be popular within the party, let alone the rest of British society initially. I think nonetheless, we have to be open in stating that we do not oppose just the latest round of immigration restrictions, but all immigration restrictions and legal inequalities between British and migrant workers. And along with this, we must strive to fight for greater links to the working class outside of Britain and stress the general interests of the class, which I would argue are a far greater consequence than, what binds, all of us, irrespective of class in Britain. And when we argue for political power, we don't support it on any basis. I think, the most likely thing that could kill this party, I think, is to end up in coalition or even being forced to preside over the capitalist state as, the single governing party. So to my mind, the new party, it has to seek to build its support among the working class on the basis of an eventual struggle with the capitalist class for political, social, economic power. So in doing this, in a strategy of, not seeking out government until that is actually something that is possible on a basis of ending capitalism. I think in doing that, it will actually win far more reforms for the working class through forcing capitalist parties into concessions than a party which enters government as soon as it can and is forced to carry out the interests of the capitalist class. So I think, as Barry mentioned, this can be very well evidenced by the experiences of Syriza and Podemos in recent years. And finally, for us to have, it's a kind of a slightly different point, but I think it's very relevant to this. And I think, finally, for us to have significant purchase in the new party, it is going to be necessary for communists to coordinate and work together, ideally as some sort of open faction, which is not divided along the old kind of organizational lines. I imagine, all of us are on some respect probably sick of, really. I think, obviously this has to be done in a principled fashion. So, we shouldn't just pretend we haven't had differences and we still don't have them. But a situation in which we all go into our own initiatives and argue for and propose very similar things will weaken the argument most of us will be making within this new party. this being said, if we can succeed in putting forward alternatives to the programme of social democracy, winning key votes at the party's conferences, and marking ourselves out as the people who have ideas in which can change society fundamentally in a way that I do not think is true of any of the people currently in the kind of organising group for this party. What is currently a social democratic party could become something, very, very different, and able to make a very, very fundamental break with the capitalist system. So that's all from me.
Thank you very much, Stephen. Thanks to Barry and Stephen for raising lots of points for discussion. What I'm going to do now is take speakers from the floor, so to speak. We normally try to limit discussion in the first instance to 3 minutes, but we'll give extended time if there's an important point, or particularly if there are differences. And there may well be quite a lot of differences with what Barry and Stephen have said, or what comes up in the discussion. But we try to limit it so that everybody gets a say, rather than one or two people taking up all the time. I've got a hand from John Tumman, so I'm going to take John, but can I see people putting their hands up using the yellow hand, and then we'll take it from there. Okay, so I've got John, and then I'm going to call in Bryce. Away, John.
Right, thanks very much, Nick. Thanks to the two speakers. I want to make a general point, and then I want to take issue with one of the points that Barry mentioned. My general point is about fear, political fear. I think that political fear is the reason in their own minds, at least, for why the movers and shakers in London around this new party have operated behind closed doors. I think they're afraid of how the media would react, and yet one or two of them have leaked to the media, as Barry mentioned. And I think that fear comes from the experience of the Corbyn camp in particular. But there is a deeper fear, I think, in the left generally, and that comes from having had a series of major defeats since the 1980s, having lived under and tried to do politics under neoliberal capitalism, which has been very, very hard and a total shock to the system for people who were brought up in a quite different era, the era of the welfare state, the post-war boom, etc. That very different era, which has been mentioned. Barry criticized, I'm not sure whether it was James Schneider or Andrew Murray, but for disaggregating the working class. The way I see it is this: the working class has changed. The working class composition always changes as capitalism changes. That's nothing new. And the working class is less focused on a commonality of working in factories, which was the case before neoliberalism, and is divided along gender, along race and ethnic terms, along all sorts of other, between people who are graduates and people who aren't graduates, between people who are primarily better at learning and operating through writing and those who are better at other things. That is a reality we have to cope with. And so what emerges for me is a concept of working class unity, which is based on the recognition that there are those definitions nowadays which weren't the case before, or at least they were different and perhaps less of a problem before in the early 20th century, where there was, for instance, sorry, if I can just bring it to a finish now. So we do have that. And we can have a concept, and I think we do have to have a concept of unity through recognition of difference and allowing a degree of autonomy and self-development from the most oppressed sections of the working class. And I'm particularly thinking here of Black and other minority, ethnic, and racially
And I'm
marginalized.
going to have to stop you now.
That's fine. I've made my points.
Thanks very much, John. Cheers. I'm calling in Bryce.
Hi, comrades. Bryce from Marxist Unity Caucus in RS21 and Transform Council. Hi, Nick. Long. Yeah, so I agree with a lot of the things Barry said about the potential for this to be quite a right-wing, undemocratic project, and agree with a lot of what he said on that. But I would also say that there is a potential for revolutionary socialists to actually push this in quite a much better socialist and definitely democratic direction. Um, so it maybe some people have kept up with the Max Shanley stuff. He's released a slate of articles and a constitution, and that has actually led to some people at the top of these undemocratic secret meetings taking some of the ideas on board and discussing them, and has maybe put pressure for them to have this founding conference. I think Archie has said at Communist University, he said, it looks like that there was basically a bureaucratic impasse. None of these different personalities could actually manage to win their politics against each other, and so they're having to throw it open to the public to make a decision. It will be in some way democratic in that it will probably have to be delegates from either these local parties or one member, one vote. There are problems either way. One member, one vote, it could just be a series of referenda where there's very little deliberative discussion at all. And with delegates, it's hard to see how there could be a proper process in place for democratically deciding who should go when these things aren't really set up. I mean, even some of the most developed of these local independent groups are only just getting their membership democracy sorted out. But I think there will be an ability for us to make an intervention. Max Shanley's floated the idea of a democratic socialist mass party platform to intervene in the conference and try and push it as kind of on the lines of DSA, but an ideal type of DSA if it was a democratic socialist party, really. He thinks that his aim it would be to try and get everyone from Mike McNair to James Schneider on board. I know Barry's criticised James Schneider. He has moved in a better direction, not completely, but he backs in his recent sidecar interview collective leadership. And he also has argued not for a party of opposition per se, but has said it shouldn't be a purely electoral party and should take a oppositional, stance on some issues. He's still got somewhere to go, but you do see him actually engaging with Max Shanley. Yeah, I'll wind up. I think there is the ability for partists and socialists to make an intervention, and hopefully win our ideas, because we need to win democratic structures in this thing to make a difference and reach a lot of the membership.
Thanks very much, Bryce. John, you've got 3 minutes. John Smithy.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
I live in Wisbech in Fenland, northeast Cambridgeshire. In the Brexit referendum, 72% of the population voted for Brexit. There are several reform councillors, and my view is that come the next general election, Reform will be the biggest party, and it'll form a government with the confidence and supply support of the Tories, and your party, or whatever it's going to be called, will have about 10 MPs if they concentrate on getting certain seats elected. The next thing I'd like to say is on Facebook, there's at least 100 Facebook groups, and they're facing the same problem all over the country, where there's these 750,000 people have signed up, but there's no way of contacting them. Carrie Murphy has said she won't release the contact details until at least the end of the year. So it's like Momentum, where they wouldn't give out the membership lists to local groups, and that's going to be a problem. And as I said, the way around it is these 100 Facebook groups. My own thing is I sent a press release to my local newspaper, the Fenland Citizen, where I said I was the secretary of the Fenland branch of Your Party, and they printed it, and they're going to print it, put it on the website, and they're going to print it in the newspaper on Wednesday, and they're also going to have a letter in the letters page about Your Party. But that's something that comrades could do, is the Facebook groups and the local newspapers. The final thing I'd like to say is when I watched the meeting of 2 weeks ago about Your Party, one of the things that what seemed to be missing is a central policy of what concrete could help people. And my view is, and I've got this from the Revolutionary Communist Party, the communist newspaper, which I used to subscribe to, but I don't anymore. They have this policy of building 1 million council houses every year for 5 years, paid for by taking the money, not taxing the rich, but taking the money off the super rich.
Okay. All right.
That's it. Thanks you.
Thanks very much, John. Keeping to your time. Paul Gerard, please.
Thanks, Nick. Yeah, I must apologise for joining late and missing a lot of what Barry said, but I've followed him on Facebook, and I'm very aware of the timely warnings that he's given about the carve-ups that are taking place. I'm glad to hear from Stephen Owen. I'm from Manchester myself. I'm glad to hear that there's a vibrant group in Stockport. We're a little bit behind the curve in Bury, where I live at the moment, but we're getting there. Just a couple of points that I wanted to make. I sympathise very much with what John, the last speaker, has said in relation to reform, but I think he's unnecessarily pessimistic. The new party, whatever it's called, has a big chance to provide an alternate pole of attraction to reform. We've seen the way in which people have moved in France and Germany around new left parties like this in order to frustrate and halt the rise of the far right. And I think we could have a similar effect in this country as well. The other point I wanted to make was that there's been a suggestion that we shouldn't be looking at elections, and I think that's absolutely right. Most people who join it will be wanting us to stand as soon as possible, wanting to get agents and logos and all sorts of things like that. And I think we should resist that. The point is about this party is it's an opportunity to bring different sections of struggle together. The Palestinian struggle, as we've seen, and they've had some electoral success anyway, but the struggle against cuts, the struggle for trans rights and so on, that's the great thing about this party. It could be an advocate and a champion for all those interests, and I think we should see it primarily as a party of struggle. If we can win the confidence of the working class through the struggles over the next few months, then we can achieve electoral success at a later stage. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Paul. I've got Will McMahon next, and can I see others who want to come in? I've got Chris Jones has got his hand up, So others, I think some people have posted in the chat. Please think about making your point in the discussion verbally. That would be great. So, Will.
Just a few disconnected points, really. First thing is that the debate that's going on between Schneider and Andrew Murray is one that's been going on since the late 1970s. And it's one between the old class-based communist parties and people who wanted to stick to class. And they were, they tended to be pro-Stalinist, to be honest. And those who split from it and who became, Andre Gores produced a book called Farewell to the Working Class. This idea that the working class has disappeared and all this kind of stuff. It's complete nonsense, of course. It's just as John Tuman was saying, it's reconstituted. Yeah. And it's working out the configuration of that reconstitution and how the working class looks now is what we've got to get our heads around if we want to build a mass working class base for this party, because it does not look the same as it used to look. It's entirely different. Yeah. I mean, so the point about what's come into being is that the working class has been engaged in huge struggles over the last 20 years of different sorts. Yeah. And it's these struggles, Corbyn can be a figurehead and whoever you want can be a figurehead. But actually, what's come out of these class struggles is the Your Party formation. Yeah. And it shouldn't surprise us that this formation is going to be full of contradictions, right? And full of lots of different points of view. So we're going to have people pro the Ukraine war, against the Ukraine war. We can have people kind of pro rejoining the EU, people against rejoining the EU. We're going to have people pro euthanasia under capitalism and people against euthanasia under capitalism. You're going to have people who are pro there being immigration policies and people against them. And we're going to have people on different sides of the trans argument, which is an argument that crosses the whole of the left. Yeah. So we're going to be in for a period of storms and stresses and argument and all that kind of stuff over the questions of socialism and democracy, right? And frankly, I bloody welcome it, right? I welcome that period of storms and stresses because it's actually going to sort out the wheat from the chaff, and it's going to produce either a party where we go, oh, fucking hell, excuse my French, we're back where we were with the Labour Party, right? Or it's going to produce something else, something that is shorn of the kind of nightmare of the past of Labourism, yeah, and produces a new kind of socialist party, mass socialist party. And for me, the key thing that we need to be doing really is building united fronts inside the party and across the class for the key issues where there is a dividing line between what capital wants and what the working class needs. Yeah, that's what we should be doing. And by that way, we can build a mass socialist party that will actually have an impact. Now, we've got to be, I think, two final things I want to say is one is that we should not be defeatist. I agree with the last contribution. We should be absolutely on the offensive because the production of 700, 800,000 people who want to see something different, right, after a pause of the election is absolutely brilliant. And we should be on the offensive. Yeah. And the other thing is that by using the United Front, right, we can actually build a majority blocks for socialism amongst this 800,000 and out into the wider working class. Yeah. One final point on the housing question. If the RCP think we can build 5 million council houses in 5 years, then they don't understand housing policy and labour policy and trading policy and all this kind of stuff. But they're right if they're saying what we should do is attack landlordism. We should attack landlordism and we should have rent controls. We should drive these people out of the housing market, and then the state should take over those houses. And that will produce lots of houses without having to build and build and build. So that should be a key attack that should be carried out. That's a policy point I wanted to make because I think it's an important one.
Thanks very much, Will. I'm going to call in Chris Jones.
I very much agree with Will's points. Sounds a bit, the idea of a maelstrom of ideas and arguments and debates and whatever is really, really fundamental to this. But I want to be slightly more concrete about it. I think comrades have begun to touch on some of the problems that are going to be coming up. I'm approaching it the other way around, which Will slightly touched on. Several 100,000 people have indicated an interest, very abstractly, very unpinned down, but represent an interest in something that will be better than what they've got at the moment. Now, they'll be all over the place where their politics are. Some of them will be wanting Labour Party 2 and things like that. Other people will be very revolutionary. But we've got to seize that as an opportunity. We can talk abstractly about reaching out to the working class, but we've actually got several 100,000 people. It was the first wave of those people we want to be connecting with. And organising them is going to be nigh on impossible. In my opinion, all the hundreds of thousands that signed up to vote for Corbyn for the leadership elections, very, very few were turned into regular activists. A large amount were turned out as hard election workers in the 2019 election, but they were never turned into consistent activists involved in whatever the campaign, the political organisation, the trade union, whatever. They were never turned into something. And what we've got to do is address them in a way that gets them to come forward and engage in these debates. And the worst thing that could happen, and certainly I suspect my memories are similar to Nick's over the last 30 years of building broad left parties, is of people becoming totally preoccupied in small left circles in arguing the toss about the nitty and gritty. I think we've got to have those arguments, but we've got to prevent them being an obstacle to the green, the new, the keen, the young, who probably know little about, or often will know little about, the sort of language we use, where we've come from, the history that we're rooted in. So very positive with Paul, with Will. Get in. I mean, I know there's the obstacle of how to make contact with them, but don't get stuck in meetings of 17 different left groups all thinking they've got the best idea. Have those debates, but have them in a sensible way, whilst trying to engage with this apparently large number of people who are interested in what the new party might offer. It will not be easy. I mean, I'm not dashing over that. I think it's going to be really difficult, but I think the key is those people are there. Let's go out and get them.
Thanks very much, Chris, and thanks for sticking to 3 minutes. I'm going to call in Janet, Silat, and then Saraya Lawrence. So, Janet, over to you, please.
Okay. I certainly agree with the spirit of the last speaker. Though maybe what I'm going to say sounds like I don't, but I do. But it's really going back to what Will was saying. And I certainly agreed with what you were saying. And so I want to talk about factions, which is kind of boring. I think and I don't like talking about structures because it bores me to death. But it seems to me within this party, to achieve what you were talking about, Will, we need to have the space for people to come together, to argue, to struggle, to be controversial. It's going to be, as you say, I think you said, it's going to be difficult. It's going to be tough. I don't think it's going to be temporary. It seems to me that will be an ongoing phenomenon. However, it isn't clear that factions will be allowed. So I think we have to think about how, as both communists, but people who also want to persuade other people to our views, how do we deal with that? How do we organize if we're not allowed to organize on a formal basis? And I think the other issue about factions, I'd rather call them caucuses, really, because factions has got a bit of a bad name, although it shouldn't have. And I think just go back to I think it's Trotsky talking about the struggle of factions. I think he was right, but I mean, we all know what we all think we mean now because of history and our experience of factions. But there was an article in Prometheus about this, and I think I largely agree with it. It was, we should have factions, but should they be temporary or permanent? And I think if they were just temporary, if they were focused, say, on a manifesto and people coming together to argue for some of these less complex, well, maybe they wouldn't be, but I mean, for things to go into a manifesto, I don't think that's good enough. I think you need permanent discussion, permanent argument, permanent debate. And yes, sometimes there will be a communist faction. Maybe that will be a thread throughout, but there will be other kinds of people coming together to argue. You know, you're not going to talk about Palestine and the future of Palestine. It's going to end because there's going to be a manifesto coming up. That is not the reality, nor should it be the reality. We want a dynamic party, one where we go on to, you know, have ideas and argue. So I think factions are quite important. And if they don't allow us to have them, we should have them anyway. That's it.
Thanks very much, Janet. Zarah.
Oh, sorry.
Yes, thanks everybody. And thanks to the speakers. My starting point is that we absolutely need to change society, that the capitalist system can't meet even the basic needs of people. And we see where it leads with the fact that what's happening in Gaza, and the world governments are standing, by and large, are standing by and letting it happen. And so I think we need to argue for this in this new formation, that we need to change society, that you can't tweak capitalism. And I think there's a desperate need for I would imagine, I can't speak for everybody else, but I would hope that everybody here believes that what we need is a mass communist, or if you want to call it socialist party, to carry out that transformation of and get rid of capitalism. And that's because A, it's necessary, B, what's happening with reform here, with far-right parties coming to power around the world, they are filling the vacuum, and that risk here, the vacuum that a complete abdication of the role of that Labour parties, and I use that term, parties are supposed to represent the interests of the working class. The leaders have completely bought into capitalism and have been bought in. And here we've got a Labour government that is carrying out the work of the bosses to the extent even of undermining the right to process in a way that the Tories have not managed to do. So that is going to lead to an enormous, it has and will continue to lead to an enormous thirst for something different. So the fact that these people have signed up is hugely positive. So I think we need to engage in this new party. I don't want it's crucial for us as socialists, communists, for this enthusiasm of people for something different to be lost to the likes of reform and their racist ideals. I don't think the intent of those who've set it up is necessarily the same as ours. And just briefly, I don't think the reason for it being behind closed doors and decisions being made behind closed doors is because of the fear of how the media would react. I think you being, I can't remember who said it, forgive me, comrade, but it's ascribing too much to them. I don't think that's it at all. But I think that I think that the democracy and democratic structures is something we have to argue for in this new formation. I don't. It's true that the workplace and conditions have changed, but and that has to be taken into consideration. But it hasn't changed the basic point that there are those who have to sell their labour to be able to survive, and so those are the people who I consider to be the working class. I agree with the comrade who says that. Sorry, there was a comrade who said that they've had to throw this open at your party to the public because they can't agree. Again, I don't think that. I think they want foot soldiers. I think there are all sorts of different interests at play in this new organisation, if it is yet. But I think it's really crucial for us and for communists and socialists to participate.
Thanks very much, Zarah. I'm going to chair myself in, if I may. From my point of view, the launching of this party and the response of 700,000, possibly 750,000 people signing up to it is an opportunity for people who see that capitalism needs to be overthrown and a new society built. It's a godsend. It's an opportunity which we cannot afford to waste. every single thing that has motivated those 700,000 people to join this party, everything that they're opposed to that's got them angry or frustrated and motivated to sign up, comes down to the problems of this present system, the capitalist system, imperialism. So we've got austerity and inequality. It comes down to the profit system. Climate catastrophe, it's the profit system. War, it's the profit system. And those of us who understand this have got to get that message across and explain that these things can't be resolved on the basis of adding a little bit more pepper and salt onto the capitalist dish. So we have to fight, and it will be quite a difficult fight, I think, for a number of reasons. We have to fight for this party to become a clearly anti-capitalist and clearly pro-socialist or pro-communist party. That's not going to be achieved overnight, but we can win lots and lots of people. So a society, instead of being based on production for profit, is based on production for need. That's a simple point that I think most people that are signed up to this party will agree with. The question will be raised, is it possible? How can we get it? Don't we need to take things cautiously and so on? And there's all sorts of ideas. One of the things that I think we've got to remind ourselves of is that all of these people who don't yet agree with us can be persuaded. None of us emerged from our mother's wombs having read the collected works of Marx or Lenin or whoever, and it took us time to understand the nature of capitalism and what the solution was, and that is a society in which the means of production are owned democratically by everybody and used to produce for the needs of everybody. That's the solution. But we didn't get there overnight. So in the discussions, we have to be, I think, friendly and patient, but firm in our politics. So we argue our case, but we're friendly and we take time, and we're going to meet all sorts of resistance and disagreements and so on. And we have to make a difference between those people who want to learn and want to participate with us in struggle, or we want to participate with them in struggle and learn lessons, and some of the people who want simply to manipulate the membership in order to get what they want, in terms of whether it's parliamentary careers and so on. So we need to develop a program where all communists, all socialists can gather around it, and our watchwords need to be democracy and socialism. Can I see if there's anybody else who wants to come into the discussion? Well, if that's the case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to invite Barry back for 7 or 8 minutes, and then Stephen back for the same, and then we'll wind up the meeting. And I thank everybody for the contributions and the discussion in the chat. So Barry.
Okay. I agree with Bryce that we have to intervene and engage. And it's an historical opportunity. 700,000 people want some kind of change, and we can intervene to try and persuade them that what we want is fundamental change. We want socialism or communism, which is the same thing. And so in Sheffield on Wednesday, we got our meeting to establish a local branch of your party. And I think we'll be pushing for democracy from below and socialism from below. And it's important that we put our socialist and communist ideas forward. Some comrades want to go with the flow from above. Tactically, they want to say, well, we won't be too critical. We'll just put our ideas in the background, and we'll get a repeat of the Socialist Alliance where you had Marxists pretending to be social democrats. We don't want that. We want to put forward our own views. And to do that, we have to have democracy. And that means we argue for one member, one vote. We argue for the right of permanent and temporary factions. We argue for minority rights, freedom of criticism. There must be freedom of criticism against the leadership. That's a crucial component of any democratic party. So nobody wants to stand aside. We're engaging, and we want the party to be socialist. And I'm optimistic. I'm optimistic that we can seek fundamental change.
Thank you very much, Barry. Stephen.
So thanks to all who've contributed. I think there's been a huge range of different points, and I think all of them have been extremely useful, and I think instructive in terms of how we should all kind of collectively move forward with in terms of our intervention in this party, new party. I think the number of points which I'd mentioned as being, I think as being really important. I think Janet's point regarding factions is really significant. I think I'd second completely what Barry said regarding the need for the rights for permanent and temporary factions. To my mind, at the end of the day, what are factions if not, basically the organized expression of some sort of, a section of an organization agreeing on certain political ideas. I don't really see, I can understand that there is a certain history regarding, people getting very tired of endless factional warfare, etc. But to my mind, I think it's better to have that than to kind of how would I describe it? Put all of that to try and kind of put all that below the surface and kind of temper it, in a sense. So, and in that sense, again, another point I would agree very strongly with is Will. I think that it is going to be a long period of quite intense discussion and disagreement, I'm sure. And I think that's a really positive thing. I think, there is certainly, it can often be the case on the left. There is a lot of people don't necessarily always talk to each other. And I think that, certainly there is a sense in which people are forced into discussing ideas, forced into trying to work together, or just simply try and understand the different perspectives of different sections of the left in this country. I think that is, whatever the party ends up as, that is a very positive thing. I would say one point that I would disagree with, or at least I guess it's one of these things that depends on exactly what's being meant by Chris Jones, was I think that although it's certainly true that we obviously don't want to just be discussing between ourselves, we need to speak to those who are newly organised into the party. I think to my mind, I don't think it's a binary, as simple of a binary as that. I think we do need to discuss and try and work out where we can unite, so that we can put forward, an intervention which is going to have, national scale. Certainly within my organisation, there are not vast numbers of us, and there is a fundamental limit to how much we can project our ideas. And my view is that, first of all, I think a lot of these are shared within the vast majority of communists in this country, and many, and in some issues, many who are not communists at all. So I think that we need to discuss, and we need to try and to some extent between ourselves, but with a view towards intervening and a view towards action, rather than it becoming interminable and nitpicking. So I think that's pretty much all from me as well. Thank you.
Okay, well, thanks very much, Steve and Barry, and thanks to everybody who made contributions. And I'm sure everybody agrees there's a lot to think about and a lot to plan and a lot to do. There's already been discussions of various groups coming together to see if those of us who call ourselves socialists or communists, as Barry said, I think people that have heard me speak before, I use the terms interchangeably. A society in which there are no classes and there's no private ownership of the means of production. There's common ownership, and it's democratically planned in the interests of all. If we can find a way of bringing socialists and communists who agree with that to work collectively without overlooking or putting to one side differences that there might be between us, we can have a much bigger impact inside this new party than we would if we're all just paddling our own canoe. So I think it's really important that we try to find a way of bringing together the communists and the socialists and presenting interesting material. There was a comment in the chat, which I particularly liked, from Chris Marsh, about having material that is interesting to the people in this party, who a lot of people, and particularly perhaps younger people, will have come into the party or will join it, and they'll be looking for answers. And if we don't provide those answers, they'll look elsewhere. So we need volunteers to write articles. And the TAS, the Talking About Socialism website, could become, if people would write for it, a place where we could have reports on local meetings. We could have reports on policy discussions, the differences, what your point of view is, what issues should we be taking up, so that, if possible, it becomes a lively sounding board or message board for what's going on inside the party, from to inform other socialists. It may be that we need to create something beyond that. So everything is up for discussion. I hope that everybody has enjoyed the discussion today. I hope that you come back to the next discussion of Talking About Socialism, but we're going to take a bit of a break for the rest of August, and we'll send out a bulletin to inform you of when we're going to meet again, sometime in the first or second week of September. We in Talking About Socialism need to work out how we can do that and what we can do. We're not going away, and we'll hopefully be putting stuff still up on the website. So please, if you haven't joined Talking About Socialism, but you want to find out more about us, then fill in the form on the TAS website, get in touch, and we'll organise a chat, tell you what we're trying to do and how you can help. And we would hope to persuade you to join and to get involved with us. But thanks very much. With that, I'll say good night to everybody, and I hope to see you at a future meeting. Good night.